Welcome for this week's Rising Tide Foundation lecture, everyone. I'm very proud to announce that we have a good friend from the China Writers Group, a group hosted by our friend Jeff J. Brown, who I think many people have listened to, either on his podcast or the interviews that Cynthia and I have done. Frans is somebody who is a very interesting soul. I'm very, very pleased that he has agreed to donate a bit of his time and share some of his experience and wisdom and insights into what is going on behind what is becoming, strangely enough, a new Iron Curtain, which hopefully can be a curtain that comes undone before things get too out of hand. We know that right now, a lot of people are waking up to thinking on a higher level than they are used to when times were obviously, at least on the surface, more stable. There was a little bit of a sense of security. The minds of many people were more inclined to simply say, I don't really care about the rest of the world. I don't really care about big questions of conspiracy or history or the future. I just want to get by with my 9 to 5, my family, my friends, my immediate experience in my community is all I really need to care about. I can't think bigger than that. The last 2.5 years have been a bit of a learning curve for many people who have come to realize that these things are not as secure as they thought, that the system itself is not what they thought it was. And we are now going through a very, very dense period of turbulence in world civilizational history. Like, this is a historic moment that we're living through. So muscles that we didn't think we had to exercise, people are exercising very fast. And the question of, well, what is this great reset? What is behind what's at the source of my problems? What are the solutions to put out the fire that I'm only waking up to now? These are all now big questions. And there's a lot of misinformation that's been strewn throughout the information landscape to capture people who tend to think outside the box and absorb them into false narratives, false explanatory models, explaining that your problem is the big bad Russians who want to destroy global democracy, or your problem is the Chinese, they just hate your freedoms. And we've seen this again and again throughout the Cold War. We've seen this after 9/11, how quickly people in a state of fear and in a state of ignorance, not knowing much about other civilizations, fell into these Kool-Aids, and they acquiesced to wars that killed millions of innocent lives throughout the Middle East. And throughout the Cold War, I mean, we allowed the growth of a Five Eyes intelligence, I would say even FBI-run dictatorship inside of North America itself. We've acquiesced to a lot of evil. Let's just say it that way. And again, it has a lot to do with ignorance. The fact that we didn't take the time to appreciate other cultures, other civilizational histories, we find ourselves susceptible to these narratives. So Frans is somebody who has worked for many, many years in China, has known the people, has interfaced with the business community, with the public sector, and now is a writer and is a public speaker who's shared his experiences. And so today, Frans, thank you so much for doing this. And after Frans's primary remarks are finished, it'll be about an hour or so, we're going to open up for Q&A. So get your thinking caps on, and like usual, put your names in the chat box, and I will call upon you like usual in queue for a lively dialogue. So Frans, it's all yours.
Okay. Good evening or good afternoon to everybody, or whatever you are. Good morning. I will share my screen that will help you to follow me. I will not strictly follow my slides. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Wait a minute, I will put it like this. Should be better. So, thank you for the introduction. I want to add a couple of things to that. That is, I have lived, worked, and having busy in China. I have still many, many friends in China. I'm retired today. I return from time to time to China, for example, for my last book. Show you my book. I went to China to interview 24 of people So I return to China from time to time. I will go to China again in March next year. I have never lived in China in an expat community. I have always lived among the Chinese, so I was forced to speak Chinese with them, with the Chinese expression, I have stand with my feet in the rice fields. And you can take that literally. I have done that. I have planted rice myself too. I was a guest lecturer at Qingdao University, but mainly I was in automotive business, where I designed and project managed new Chinese phones. What's going on? Apart from that, I was also in medical devices industries. After my time in Shanghai, I've mainly lived in Shanghai. I returned to Europe, lived in Stuttgart, worked for Mercedes-Benz for 3 years, but I couldn't stand it here no longer. I couldn't adapt again to the business culture here. So after 3 years, I returned to China. And then I lived in Suzhou, worked in Wuxi, designed and developed new electronic devices there. I am a member from several clubs, institutes, and so on. Yeah, and China Writers Group already mentioned. I have a slide here about cognitive dissonance. Why? Well, I feel usually during my lectures, a lot of people are getting uncomfortable, sometimes even angry. In March this year, I was physically attacked by 2 politicians during one of my lectures. So that's why this slide is here. I hope that all the people here from my audience this evening here have a little bit an open mind. So just listen to what you see at my slides. You don't have to believe me. You don't have to agree with me, but be prepared that everything what I will say here will be completely different from what you learned and read about China in the media. Everything will be completely different. So be prepared for that. China is very different from what our media is showing us. I'll tell you a short story about Marco Polo. You know, Marco Polo went to China from Venice with his uncle. He returned and he wrote a book. That book was printed in many languages, spread over all of Europe, but very few people believed him. Even today, there are people saying Marco Polo never went to China. He is just a fantast. What he's saying is not true, and so on. That was already at that time of Marco Polo the case. So one day, shortly before he died, on his deathbed, the priest advised him to take back some of his strong statements about China. And Marco Polo replied, I have only told you half of what I know about China. And the other half I will take with me to my grave. you will not believe me anyway. Well, that's the feeling I often get when I'm telling people about China here in the West. That same feeling from Marco Polo. People, they don't believe me. They cannot accept that there is such a rich, famous culture at the other side of the world. I often get that feeling too. Our media, our regular mainstream media, and a big part of the alternative media too, they are telling us stories. Nothing, really nothing is true from what I read in the media about China. There are two main barriers which the media misuse. As first is the language. Of course, very few people speak and can read Chinese. So it's difficult for Western people to consult the Chinese media or even social media in China. That's the first barrier. The second barrier is the culture. China culture is so very different from our Western culture. That's another barrier. And then, especially for American people, there are two other barriers. So they have four barriers in total. First one, the English language is the lingua franca of the world. That means Americans or English-speaking people have no real incentive to learn Chinese. If you don't learn Chinese, you can never understand Chinese culture, of course, and you can never understand China. The English-speaking world has no real incentive, no strong incentive to learn Chinese. And then finally, the other barrier that the Americans have, particularly the Americans, that is, they don't have a Vergangenheitsbewältigung as the Germans have. The Germans, still today, still the young German people have a feeling of guilt about what happened in World War II. Of course, the Americans don't have that, but that Vergangenheitsbewältigung is helping the Germans enormously in China. You certainly know that German companies in China are very successful. The German car industry and whatever, all German brands are very popular in China. There are cities in China which are actually German. All investments are from Germany. And that is exactly because of that feeling of guilt that the Germans have. They are in China very humble. They know that they are in a foreign country, that they have to behave as per the Chinese culture. So that's the number 4. That's the 4 barriers that English-speaking American people have. And our media are misusing that barriers so they can tell us all kinds of stories. I often say to people, read the regular media, turn the story 180 degrees, and then you're close to the truth. So, China. China is a big country. In surface, China, Europe, and United States are more or less the same. You see in blue, surface is not so very different. But then look at the population. 1.4, almost 1.5 billion people. There are more Chinese people than people living in Africa. There are more Chinese people than black people. There are more Chinese than America, Canada, Japan, and Europe combined. The only country coming close to the population of China is India. But many countries, take Russia for example, it's peanuts population. China has 1/5 of the global population. These are figures, it's difficult to imagine that. When you walk over the streets in Shanghai or Beijing, one can see that. There are really very much Chinese people, and China is crowded. When I was living in China, I returned to my family here, or on average every 3 or 4 months. And every time I was stunned. I couldn't understand how many sad people there are in the West. We Westerners, we are really sad people. We forget to smile. I see that still today, every day on the streets, in every small and big city here in the West and in Europe. We are not happy anymore. And I think that's because our future is so obscure. Our hope is fading away. But then go to China. How many happy people, smiling people, and exactly that is making such a big difference in life. The happiness of the Chinese people, that is driving me in everything. That's in culture, but also in business. The Chinese people are satisfied with their political system. In China, the satisfaction is between 80–90% or more with the political system. Here in the West, it's between 30 and 40%. The Chinese people have many reasons to be happy. Their spendable income is increasing by, on average, 8% per year. They can save more money. Propaganda. Propaganda is a little bit dirty word here in the West. It is used as something negative. It's not something good, propaganda. We know that here in the West, propaganda, that's something from dictatorships and authoritarian regimes. That's how we perceive propaganda. We know propaganda was invented, actually, the book by Edward Bernays in 1928, I think, was written by him. and he defined 10 features, 10 characteristics of propaganda. During my lectures, I invite my audience often to point to one single article in the Chinese media where you can find these 10 characteristics of propaganda. And I pay them a beer if they can find one. But up to now, I didn't have to pay a beer. There's way much propaganda in our Western media than in Chinese media. Once you know these 10 characteristics of propaganda and you watch TV here in the West, it's not so difficult to recognize all these 10 points. One can see that during every news or whatever, even in entertainment programs, one can see that. All these 10 points here in the West. In my opinion, there is no propaganda in China. There was propaganda, yes, and still today, China has a ministry of propaganda. They are not ashamed to call that a ministry of propaganda. But what they are doing is, as per our definition, much more public relations. It's not propaganda in the way we perceive the word propaganda. It's not political propaganda. They are showing on Chinese television or so, showing the beauty of the nature, landscapes and things like that, their culture, or a simple dry notification or things like that. But propaganda, real propaganda, with the 10 characteristics, I've never seen that in China. There are almost no people here in the West who are aware how many political parties there are in China. People think China is a communist country, nation, and that's the only party. That's a way of thinking. No, there are several political parties. And members of these parties, they are actively participating in politics in China. They have high-ranked positions. For my book, I interviewed two people of one of the 8 minor parties. And yes, of course, they have different ideas than the Communist Party, but all these parties are well aware that they have to work for the people, that the parties are there for the people, not for the show, and that at the end, they have to agree with each other about political issues and work together. That's the way of thinking of these political parties in China. Last year, end of November and beginning December, there were elections in China. I bet no one of you knows about that. Has someone seen anything in our Western media about these elections in China? In the US, there were midterms elections, and we all know that every day we got the news about that. But the election in China, I bet nobody of you knows the parties, the positions and the viewpoints of these parties, who has won, in which city, and so on. I bet nobody of you is aware of that. There was nothing, really nothing in the news. If you search on internet, the number of political parties you can find quite easily. You can find that even on Wikipedia. But about the elections, you have to know Google or another search machine quite well to find something about that. It's better to know some Chinese and use a Chinese search machine to find something about these elections. In our Western media, there's almost nothing about elections in China. And many people think that there are no elections in China. Average people, they think there are no elections in China. Which is sad. The way our media is treating us, it's a shame. About democracy. I feel it is a little bit strange that the definition of democracy is different in English as in other languages. If you take an English dictionary, the word democracy is defined by using the word elections. In English, there is no democracy without elections, which is actually not right. If you take a dictionary in German or in French or in Italian or in Dutch or in Chinese or whatever, they all go back to the original definition of democracy, which we all know is from the Greek, means the power of the people. Demos is people and Katrein is rule. The people rule the country. That is democracy. In that word, democracy, there's nothing about elections. But nevertheless, in all Chinese, take Cambridge or whatever, in all these definitions in English, there is no democracy without elections. Now, in China, there are elections. No, there's no problem. But that contradiction between the English definition of democracy and the other languages, strange. Now, in China, it's even in the constitution. And they state it even stronger. That is the democratic dictatorship led by the working class. Democracy should be based on the alliance of workers and peasants. And politicians are the slaves of the people. That's as per the Chinese vision of democracy. And in China, there is real democracy. We call our Western countries democracies, but it's a show. In China, people, I told that before, are satisfied with their political system. They are satisfied with the Communist Party. They are happy with their politicians. And that is American research reports. It's not something from China. It's not biased. It's American research showing that a large majority of the Chinese are happy with their political system. That is democracy. And that's why I say there's more real democracy in China than in all Western countries combined. You can take that literally, mathematically even. There is more democracy in China than in all Western countries combined, mathematically. Now, in our media, we read sometimes that China is a communist country, or maybe it is socialist. Is it democratic? Is it China authoritarian? Is it centrally controlled, so from top to bottom? None of this is entirely true. It's a little bit different. China, of course, is a meritocracy, meaning that the merits of the politicians are of high importance. As per the Chinese constitution, China is a socialist country with Chinese characteristics. That's the constitution. And also written in the constitution is the democratic dictatorship by the working class, which is a little bit different. In times of the Soviet Union, it was led by the proletariat. Not entirely the same. China is not a communist country if you define communist as per our Western vision. We Westerners, we have the word communist in our mind, and then we are thinking on the former Soviet Union, or Eastern Germany, or Cuba, or that kind of communist. Or maybe some people are thinking about the communists of this quite small communist party in our Western countries. China is not communist in that way, not at all. Even more, China has broken up with our Western communist parties. There are no friends with them because communism in China is very different from the communism as we know that here in our Western countries. The Communist Party of China is, you can even not compare it with a Western political party. The Communist Party is much more something like a service club. You know, Rotary, Alliance, and that kind of service clubs. Well, the inner working of the Communist Party is much more similar than such a service club than to a political party in the West. You know, in such, maybe some people from you are member of a service club, and me too. You know, the internal rules in service clubs are quite strict, and you don't get in from one day to the other. There's a waiting time and a test time and interviews and so on, and you need people to guide you before you get member. Well, similar to the Communist Party. The Communist Party has 92 or 93 million members today, which is more or less same for the number of people, Christian people in China. It takes, on average, 3 to 5 years to get member of the Communist Party. It is extremely difficult, and the exams, interviews, the readings, and the community service you have to do is really hard. Only 1 on 10 candidates are accepted for the Communist Party. So China is not communist in our Western definition of communist. Now, where is the Chinese Communist Party of China standing today compared to other Western parties? In which way can we position them? We usually use a measuring system left to right. That's not entirely, it doesn't work any longer today. In the past, maybe there was clearly left, which was red, and right, which was blue. Yes, but today it's difficult to classify political parties in the West from left to right today. But in the past, for sure, the Communist Party of China in the 1950s, 60s certainly was left. Not extreme left, but left, yes. And the Kuomintang, of course, was right. And at that time, our Western communist parties also were left. And we had many other parties from left to right. But today, it's a little bit different. I cannot say that the Communist Party today, like Xi Jinping, is left. Not at all. The Communist Party, as per our Western classification system, is extreme right. Why is the party extreme? Because they are capable. People is the one, and in that way they are left. Yes, but if he strictly closed borders, which is something between West. Party promoting respect for family values, which is a right-wing issue in the West. There is emphasis on the importance of education. Again, that's something more to the right. There is nationalism, and respect for the national culture, which is for sure right wing. And then finally, look at the good relations that China has with Hungary, Viktor Orban, which is demonized here in Europe because they are extreme right, they say. That's a good, extremely good friend of China. With Alexander Vucic in Serbia, again, who is demonized here in Europe. Serbia and Alexander Vucic is not allowed to join the EU or NATO because he's extreme right. And of course, China's good friend with Russia, with Putin, with Duterte in the Philippines, with Bolsonaro in Brazil. All of them are in our media right wing. So that's why I placed the Communist Party of China on the right-hand side. So there's meritocracy in China. In the Communist Party and in administration, there are less than 30% of the people working in the administration in China. Less than 30% is member of the Communist Party. You don't have to be member of the Communist Party to make career in the Chinese administration. Promotion in the Chinese administration and in politics is based on merits. I recommend you to read the story of Cao Bingbing. She's now today governor of Liaoning province in the north. It is published by Princeton University. And she, in that report, she is explaining what she had to do to get to that position of governor of Liaoning province. It is really touching. I wish that we in the West would select our politicians in the same harsh way. What she's describing there, what terrible things she had to stand, how many interviews, how many weekends she had to work with the ordinary people or to do community service. In China, promotion of everybody in the administration is based on merits. I have a good friend. He was a professor here at the University of Leuven, a Chinese guy. He's married here also, and his son is a famous volleyball player. Doesn't matter. He moved back to China, I think some 10 years ago or so, and he is now managing a big part of the administration for the Chinese trade. He was in charge of setting up the strategy for the trade negotiations in time of the trade war with Trump and later Biden also. So he has made that strategy. And I interviewed him 2 years ago. And he confirmed to me, today China is a true meritocracy. The days of Guanxi and Maotai are over. What is Guanxi and Maotai? Guanxi is the system of relationship, the ancient system, also based on Confucianism, of relationships in China. And Maotai is the famous baijiu, the liquor that the Maotai brand was famous for giving or buying politicians years ago, before Xi Jinping started this tigers and flies action, where he rooted out all the corruption in China. So the days of Guanxi and Maotai are over. More than 95% of the politicians and civil servants are appointed and promoted on their merits. Think about how many people here in the West are promoted on their merits. This slide is somewhat controversial, and it made a couple of politicians here in this country extremely angry. Here, this is my own research, and I defended that for Henan University some time ago. Here, I am saying that Chinese politicians have a 25 points higher IQ than Western politicians. 25 points, 25 IQ points. That's a lot. That's something you can feel in a conversation with someone. 25 points. So Chinese politicians are much smarter than Western politicians. Why? Well, first of all, we know that Chinese people and also Japanese, Korean have a 10 IQ points higher IQ than we in the West. Chinese, on average, that's the average of the 1.4 billion people, they have 10 IQ points more than Westerners. They are 10 points smarter than we. That's Western research. We cannot deny it. And secondly, and I think that's based on research from a Canadian university, they found out that STEM students have a 15 points higher IQ than sociologists. In other words, mathematicians or engineers, whatever kind of engineer, they have 15 points higher IQ than somebody who studied sociology or psychology, archaeology, or whatever sociology directions. That makes a difference of 15 points. Now I transfer that to politicians. We know that all Western politicians are sociologists. Almost all, maybe 95%. Very few engineers or mathematicians among our politicians. Very few. In China is the opposite. Almost all Chinese politicians are STEM graduates. Many engineers among the politicians. Also, Xi Jinping is basically an engineer. Most Chinese politicians are STEM graduates. That makes a difference of the 10 points of the average of the Chinese plus the 15, the difference between STEM and sociologists, makes 25, which I tried to represent in that graph at the lower left side. We also know, on top of that, that everybody who's passing the GACO is the entrance exam for universities in China, that everybody who is passing that has an EQ of at least 140. Here in the West, not so many people member of Mensa. So all these people who are passing the GACO every year, hundreds of thousands of students, have an IQ of 140. Then there are two things which I also should add, but I don't have exact figures. That is the meritocracy. If you select all these politicians, of course, then you select the people automatically will have a higher IQ. But I don't have exact figures for that. So I cannot add number 3. And the number 4 is the Flynn effect. The Flynn coefficient, the Flynn figure, is the way you have to adjust the IQ figure every 2 or 3 years, because people normally get smarter. And you have to bring the average to 100. So you have to adjust that a little bit every 2 or 3 years. And that's called the Flynn effect. In our Western countries, the Flynn index is going down. The past 15 years, the Flynn Flynn index is going down. That means we are getting more stupid here in the West, to say it so friendly. And also that is something one can see in a conversation with older people who studied 30, 40 years ago, or the younger people now. We don't make progress in IQ. While in China, the Flynn index is going up. People are getting smarter every year. Conclusion, imagine you have a delegation of Chinese politicians who have to negotiate with Western politicians. For example, some time ago, I think 2 years ago, in Alaska, they were sitting at one side of the table, 4 or 5 Westerners, at the other side, 4 or 5 Chinese people, and they are talking to, of course, with a translator. But the IQ difference on the left side and on the right side of the table is so enormous. Sometimes I feel pity for the Western politicians or negotiators. I feel shame when they have to negotiate face to face with Chinese politicians. There in Anchorage, it was very visible, the clash of the two kinds of politicians. Really very sad. I've done some research about Christianity in China. Our media are telling us that Christianity is repressed in China. That's the official story that the media is trying to sell us. That, of course, is not true. In China, there is Christianity of all kinds. There are the Protestants, the official. There are, first of all, there are two big groups. They are the Sara, the state administration, recognized Christians, Protestants and Catholics. And they are the not recognized, people who don't want to register. That are the two big groups. Then in each group, there are Catholics and there are Protestants. In the Protestants, there are also two divisions. But okay. Then from the others, there are the Catholics, which were the former underground church. There was also an underground church of the Protestants. But the Catholics, they were reporting to the Pope in Rome, while the Catholics, recognized by Sarah, were reporting to Beijing. Today, there are no underground Christians anymore. There are no house churches. So it's better to call these people who are not with the Sarah recognized, to call them unregistered, because they are no longer underground. There are no underground Christians in China today. They are not registered, but not underground. And still are still some house churches, but these people have their churches too. They are not always so recognizable as churches, but there's a cross on it as on other churches. The recognized Christians, Catholics and Protestants, they all have their famous and historic churches, while the not registered usually have community centers which they use as a church, but not underground, and very few house churches. Now, my number 5 there in purple are the non-denominational Christians. What is that? These are people who don't report to Rome or to somebody else or to Beijing. They are entirely independent. They are a little bit Protestant, a little bit Christian, not very Christian in total. That are the these priests or monks or fathers, they founded their own churches. And these churches indeed are repressed. That is because many or most of them are covers for CIA activities. And that is why they are repressed. I don't want to send my children to such churches. I don't trust them at all. By the way, I've done this research together with Ian Johnson and some other people, famous people, to get to these figures. Oops. And that's why I say loud and firm that there is more religious freedom in China than in Western countries. No, you don't have to believe me. You can check it yourself. My book is about grassroots politics. In China, politics is not a matter of top down, but from the bottom to the top. In China, politics is made at the bottom. I'll give you an example. Taxes in China are collected by local communities and finally by the provinces. If there is a province who does not agree with a new law or so, they simply don't forward the taxes to Beijing. That happened in the past decade several times, and then they have to negotiate and so on to get to an agreement. In China, politics is made at the bottom, and the top of the Communist Party and top politicians, they really have to care about the bottom. Xi Jinping is all the time saying you should do more opinion polls. You should go to the social media. You should know what the people want. What are the problems of the people? You have to go to the people. It are the people who are governing our country. In China, there's an ancient system of petitions. Today, of course, opinion polls and participation systems are all online over the internet and with apps and so on. In China, there's a system, an online system, where you can log in with your ID card and you can file a complaint to whatever politician, even Xi Jinping. And that is taken very seriously. Now, most of these complaints are about very ordinary things there at the bottom. It's about housing, urban planning, income, healthcare, education, and other things. But if you have a serious complaint about, for example, corruption of one or another politician, no problem. You can go there to complain. Or there are other systems like petitions and opinion polls and so on, still exist. And by the way, most new laws in China are benchmarked and based on 5 to 8 other countries' similar laws. The law about social security, for example, is benchmarked with the law in Belgium. And one can see that it is quite similar, almost a copy of the law in Belgium. The number of days you can stay from work if your uncle died, for example, and all these other things, relationships between employer and employee, that law is benchmarked on the law of Belgium and other countries. They benchmark all their new laws. Then they usually test it out in 2 to 3 cities, then over a whole province. Then they adjust the law a little bit, if required, and only then they spread it out over the country. That's a normal way they establish new laws in China. The community building. In China, in every high-rise building, every apartment building, there's a community, local community. Many of them are old ladies. Well, old ladies these days, not so old anymore. They use an app to communicate with each and everybody in their community, or to report issues, or to settle issues. They are really very helpful. The oath of every new, most of these community members, local community members, are Communist Party members, volunteers. The oath of every new Communist Party member is, I promise to be the first to bear the sorrows and the hardships of the people and to enjoy the pleasures as last. And they take it very literally. I'll give you an example. When there was the COVID outbreak in Wuhan, there were members of the Communist Party coming from all corners of the society, of China, and of society also, yes? From high-rank people to low-rank people, they all went to Wuhan. All of them were Communist Party members to help with often very simple things there in Wuhan. So they take that oath very literal. This is a statement of Xi Jinping. When I go to China, I feel there much more free, and I feel there's more democracy, more freedom of speech in China than here in Western Europe. Thank you, everybody. Are we ready for the questions?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Frans. And yes, we are. We have already a few people lined up in queue. For those who didn't notice, I plugged Frans's book right there in the chat box. And for those listening online, it will be available in the description box, Statecraft and Society in China. That's available very, very affordable on Amazon. So check that out. The first question that we had, Frans, is from Jerry Therier in Ontario. Jerry, go for it.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Thank you very much, Mr. Vandenbosch. That was a very educational talk. And I have a question concerning the graphs you were showing on the IQ. And you were saying how in the West, there's an index where it's actually going down. And I can agree with that because I see it. And in my thinking, it's because of what we call the counterculture in Western society that is increasingly dominant in our politics, our social structure. And I think you went into it a bit where you were discussing the church in China, and you see it here in Canada where you see quite a number of churches who are closing from lack of members, because in a lot of cases, it's only the older people who are going to church and less the younger people. But the other thing I really noticed, I'm getting to my question, is particularly the abuse of alcohol and drugs. And, you know, during COVID, when we had the lockdown and you had a lot of these businesses and stores closed, the stores that sold alcohol and sold marijuana, I don't think they closed for one day. The government wouldn't allow them to. They needed them open, you know, as if they wanted to keep the population drugged in that. But my question is, all of your years in China, my thinking is, you know, from what the Chinese nation saw from the British Opium Wars, they would be very, very anti-drug. But did you ever see this problem, this counterculture problem, the alcohol and drug abuse in China that we see in the West so dominant here?
No, I hardly see any drugs in China. I have seen drugs in China, in Shanghai, in certain areas, but almost not comparable with here in Western Europe or in United States. Alcohol is another matter. In the north is somewhat worse than in the south. I have seen people binge drinking in the north, in Shanghai and Jiangsu province, Zhejiang and so. I have only seen that among Westerners, binge drinking. In the north, I have seen that in ordinary Chinese restaurants a couple of times, not so very much, but yeah, one cannot say that alcohol abuse is an important problem in China. Also in society or so, at the company where I was that I was managing in Wuxi, 720 people, there was no problem with alcohol abuse or things like that. Many other issues, of course, but alcohol, so yes and no. Yes, in the north, there's more alcohol abuse than in south. In south of the Yangtze, no, very few.
Right, Rohit, are you still there? Okay, Rohit is just saying 1 sec. They're having trouble with the their mute unmute option. Okay, Rohit, while you figure that out, we're going to skip to Dasha for a moment because Dasha is 15 hours in the future. So Dasha, go for it.
I have a question. When I attended I think it was a Protestant church in Shanghai, and they had written on their leaflets that you needed to be a foreign citizen, like you needed to have a foreign passport to attend that church. So I wanted to ask why that was exactly in that particular church.
I am not aware of that particular case. But I'm very interested, so please send me a link or something, or where I can read that. Was that recently or some time ago? I don't know.
It was in 2019.
Sorry?
It was in 2019.
Oh, okay, some time ago. I'm sorry, I don't know. I'm also not aware that there are churches in Shanghai who are exclusively for foreigners. I don't know that, but it is not impossible. I don't know. And from that incident, what happened here? I'm sorry, I don't know.
Okay.
Rohit, have you been able to fix your mic yet?
Hi, can you hear me?
There you are. Yeah.
Hey, Frans. So in the West, when we hear about Chinese politics, we often hear about factional politics, so like Jiang Zemin and the Shanghai clique, Hu Jintao and the Youth League. What does that mean? What are the factions in China, and how have they changed since Xi Jinping has come into power?
I told you very briefly, I think, about the tires and flies action of Xi Jinping when it came to power in 2012. He has rooted out the corruption for a big part. I estimate 90% of the corruption is rooted out. Before 2012, corruption, political corruption, was enormous, really terrible. I can tell you stories, unbelievable, about politicians, money laundering and bringing to the foreign countries, and all kinds of princelings and their behavior, which was quite visible in Shanghai, where they were showing off with their cars and so on. But now, at that time, I also was involved in certain things. Yeah, if you are managing a company, you're part of it. There's no way to escape it. That was not about big amounts, but yes, I have done that myself too, long before 2012. But it is drastically changed after 2012. Today, I don't even dare to give a present to a civil servant, even not privately. It is dangerous to do that today. Even among friends, watch out with it. The anti-corruption is terrible. For sure, in Shanghai, Jiangsu, Zhejiang, there is almost no corruption anymore. There is still some corruption in certain provinces. And with corruption, it's not just about money, it's also about a woman and about foreign travel and all kind of, not so nice things. I've seen it happening before my nose every day before 2010. But today, there's almost nothing anymore of that kind of corruption. And about the cliques in the different sections, different way of thinking in China, it's not just in the Chinese Communist Party that there are people with different ways of thinking. They have different opinions. And for sure, these people from the other parties have very different opinions than the Communist Party, certainly. But the ancient traditions and Confucianism is making them very well aware that they finally have to find a solution. They can fight very hard to each other, but finally they all fight for the well-being of the people. And they are aware of that. Of course, politicians who are fighting for their own career or for the career or for the well-being of foreign countries or so, they are rooted out, they are put aside, of course. That is quite clear. The difference of opinions is within the Chinese society and the different ways to do the better way to do good for the welfare of the people. And that is actually no problem if they fight hard about that. Of course, in our Western media, they pick it out. That one was not, didn't agree with that, and that has given a press conference like that, and he said that, and things like that. But finally, they know that their target is the well-being of the Chinese people, and they are working on that, unless they are paid by the United States, of course, or not. So that are the different fractions and the corruption in China. Does that answer your question?
So you're trying to say that these factions are more along ideological lines rather than like geographical or regional lines?
No, they are certainly not geographically. Ideologically, that even that is too broad. There are people in China today, politicians even, who think that a Western democracy is superior to this Chinese democracy. There are politicians who are genuinely thinking that, which are not paid by the CIA. There are Chinese politicians thinking such things. And they can spread that. I know somebody, Mr. Hu Fusun, for example, from Nanjing. He is giving lectures at universities where he is saying loud and clear, I want all the members of the Communist Party Standing Committee to come on the television and to set them on their knees and to begging for forgiveness for what happened during the Cultural Revolution. So that is a politician from the Kuomintang Party in Nanjing who is saying that in his lectures at various universities, because he's traveling all over China and giving lectures at universities. He's allowed to say that if one day, and I told him that, if one day there's a Western media or so recording what he is saying during his lectures, then it's done with him. That it's not very nice, and it is not true that Western democracy is superior to the Chinese. That is not true, but he is allowed to say that in his lectures. Member of the Kuomintang Party, one of the smaller alternative parties. So such things are happening in China, yes. And yes, there are people with very different ideas. There are different fractions, but they are not united. It's incomparable with the Republicans and Democrats in the United States, for example, or in other countries where they are single people.
And this is sort of on a unrelated.
Rohit, and then this will have to be the last question because we have a big list of people waiting to ask Frans a question.
Yeah, this will be quick. The Kuomintang, I think I heard that Chiang Kai-shek's grandson won election over in Taiwan. What do you see happening in Taiwan's next election?
There were elections last weekend in Taiwan. yesterday, Tsai Ing-wen has resigned. The Kuomintang in Taiwan had a big victory in Taiwan. The elections are finished and the votes are counted. So what I expect for the future of Taiwan, it will go very fast from now on. Kuomintang has already said that they agree with one China, two systems, which they negotiated a long time ago with Beijing. So I expect it to go much faster now, the reunification with China. It's done and over with the DPP from Tsai Ing-wen, sponsored by the Americans. The people have voted against that. So, yeah, Beijing has shown patience for a long time, and even during Pelosi's visit and so on, Beijing was extremely patient. And of course, China, Beijing will not attack, will not invade Taiwan. There are mainland Chinese people in everywhere in Taiwan. They know exactly what's happening in every neighborhood in Beijing. They know that. They know what's going on in Taiwan. So all the better. I was very happy yesterday evening to see that the DPP lost the elections.
Yeah, I'm happy that I let you ask that third question. That was good. That had actually fallen under my radar as well. I didn't even know that Tsai Ing-wen had resigned. That's fantastic. Okay, interesting. All right, so the next question goes to Pascal.
Yes. Hi. Hello, can you hear me? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Vandenbosch. I wanted to preface it with basically, maybe you saw that our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, saw Mr. Chairman Xi Jinping in Bali at the G20. They had a short exchange, which was transmitted over the social media. A lot of people have been sharing this, and obviously our medias have been trying to lesser the impact or lesser the what happened between the two. But to me, when you showed the IQ that stroke really hard, but it was to me a good example, a good proof of principle of what you were actually saying, knowing that Justin Trudeau is actually not even a lawyer, because I think most of our politicians in the West are, you said in the social sciences, so lawyers and all that. Justin Trudeau is not. He's just an actor. He's not so good at it. But yeah, our politicians really think that they can win just by playing with the words. And what you were saying with the fact that in China, most of these civil servants or people that are in government are actually trained into the hard sciences, STEM science, or engineers or whatnot. To me, it really it was very interesting. It was a good paradox, and to see that you put the Chinese the Communist Party actually on the right. that was also pretty good. I was just wondering, basically in the West, we we try to bring everything under democracy, transparency, polls and surveys and all and whatnot. But it seems like problems never get solved. And in China, I guess problems are different because engineers, are problem solvers. That's basically what they're trained into. So they have to solve problems given the nature of whatever the environment, the structural constraints. And so I was just thinking about that. Do you think that that's the issue that we don't really understand in the West, because problems are being solved? Like when you see the technological advancement that's going on in China, I guess a lot of the problems that we have here in the West, concerns that we have with the healthcare, with infrastructure, energy, and all that, in China, they don't really have the same problems anymore. So we don't really speak the same language when we talk to each other. So when Trudeau was talking to Xi Jinping, he was not really trying to win the argument against the Chinese. He was trying to just look good for public consumption in the West. What's your view on that?
Yeah, it was such a pity for the poor Trudeau. It was a perfect example of what I said in my slide about IQ. But it's time after time and again, it's not just Trudeau, it are all the Western politicians when they are trying to be smart or whatever. And then I'm seeing such things from both sides. And if you see it from Xi Jinping's side, he has to handle with such people. He has to talk with such kind of people, such stupid people who are refusing to take any responsibility, who are not really managing their country. I have seen a press conference from the Chinese where they are saying or encouraging Western politicians to take up responsibility for their own people. So that's a wish from China to the Western politicians: please do something for your own people. Sad, it's really sad. And we were talking about the engineers. Yes, they are engineers. The whole Chinese society is organized as on an engineering way. In China, the most used program is an Excel sheet, not Word or text or whatever. It's an Excel sheet. Everything is done with an Excel sheet. Even politicians. You know, when I was in Beijing talking to Pu Chen, the professor who was here and then moved to there, was putting up the strategy for the trade negotiations. I had the opportunity to see I was in his office, to see his laptop from some distance, maybe 2 meters distance. And he said to me this, because I was so worried at that time, and I wanted to give him some recommendation. Watch out for the Americans, they will cheat you there and cheat you there in their trade negotiations. And he said to me, Frans, don't worry, we are ready for it. We are going to all of these negotiations in a seat. We are taking the airplane to the negotiation table together, usually 4 or 5 people who go there, And they take with them an Excel sheet. An Excel, can you imagine? I could see the Excel sheet from some distance with many, many tab sheets, you know, tab sheets at the bottom. So they make up their strategy, which is sound as an FMEA. I don't know if you know what's an FMEA. In automotive and aviation industry, they use an FMEA to be sure that the product will do it, that there will be no failures on it. In the same way, they put their strategy in an Excel sheet with many tab sheets, with all kinds of reports from all kinds of universities all over China and in the West. So it is based on so many reports. There were almost 3,000 people working on that strategy. And he, my friend Puli Chen, had a final Excel sheet to be given to these people before they go to the airplane for the negotiations. In an Excel sheet. So everybody from bottom to top are thinking in an Excel way. Another example is when Chinese people are learning English. And you know, they have to learn English vocabulary and grammar, and then they have to put a sentence together. And they learned its subject, then verb, and so on, that sequence. So in their mind, they put that in an Excel sheet. So it's first subject, verb, and so on. And then when they start talking, they use that from their brain, from their Excel sheet, and they say, oh, now subject, yep, up, and then the sentence is coming. I mean, the people who are start learning English, start speaking.
Sorry, my internet was a little shaky on my end. We have a question, and by the way, Frans, I didn't ask you. How long do you have until? Do you have to stop it at some point?
No, I can go on until midnight.
Okay, all right. We won't need you for that long, but I appreciate the flexibility. That's great. All right, good. So Makos has a question on private tutoring. I don't know if Makos, are you still there? Okay, we'll get back to Makos. I'm sure they just have to fix the microphone.
Yes. Hi. Can you hear me?
Hello. Yes.
Yeah. Hi. My question is, why did the Chinese government ban private tutoring? Because it seems that they had some a government ban on these private tutoring companies, where these companies basically went out of business because of this ban. Is there a reason why they chose to do this? And is there another side of the story that we haven't heard of in the West? Thank you.
Yeah. Yes. There are several issues with that private tutoring. They also were restricting gaming, online gaming and so on. So they want the younger people, the students, to focus on their study, on their basic study. And also, learning English is losing some importance in China. In short, the history about learning English in China. In the years 2000, there were very few people speaking English in China, very few. I went to Myanmar, Burma, and there were much more people speaking English there than in China. In 2000, very few. there were people speaking French or Russian, and a few speaking Japanese, but English. Then all of a sudden, 2005 or so, I think, it was all private tutoring, Oxford English. And for my amusement, I went to some test classes for that. It was really salespeople. They were jumping around and trying to sell a course, Oxford English. Then around the years, maybe 2012, 2014, it was done and over with Oxford English. Still, English learning was on a rise, but Oxford English, it was American English. From then on, all private tutoring was American English. But now, since more than 4 or 5 years, I estimate, English learning is going down again. And the people still learning English is again Oxford English. So English, what do you want? And on the rise, a steep rise, is learning German now. But no private tutoring anymore. And I feel it's good. They learn more than enough English apart from school. They learn it on internet and everywhere, just like we here in the West are learning English. My English, she never learned English in school or not private tutoring, but she's speaking English. And that's the way the Chinese also do that now. There is no need on additional English learning today in China. People are learning German now, more German and Russian again. Back in before 2000, still many old people were speaking Russian. That was done and over now, but now again Russian again.
I guess my question is that, if there's a market demand for such private tutoring, that parents are willing to pay for this education for their children, why is it banned by the government? That's
they want
big question.
to, yeah. They want to cut all extracurricular courses, to cut that off. It's not just English, all the extra. These young students, young people from 5 to 15 years old, they were under high pressure of all kinds of extracurricular courses, not just English, but also others, and sports, of course, but also music and all kinds of things. So there had to happen something. There was too much. Also, and that is already since the years 2010, maybe 15 years already, there's a problem with these native English teachers. They are not the best quality, let's say, among the foreign expats community. We were looking down on them. They are adventurous, not serious often, and the quality of these courses was often not so very good. So I agree with the government to put a ban on English teaching out of the school. I agree with that, and for good reasons.
I have a question as a follow-up to that one, and then I'm going to let Magdalena ask a question as a teacher herself. I'm sure she's got something interesting to say on this. Carrie has just written a commentary, which is something I had also heard about, where Carrie asks, my understanding was that English-speaking tutors, many of them were allied. I mean, they say were largely, I would say many of them were allied or were operatives for the CIA and actively working to undermine China's sovereignty with the spread of China propaganda. I have heard something similar that was a problem. What you've just said as well is a new factor in my mind. I didn't know that there was, I didn't know that it was just I thought it was only the tutoring, but you're saying it's more broadly the emphasis on a variety of extracurricular things that are troublesome for the cultural development of the youth. But have you heard anything about the question of the CIA operatives or agents that are utilizing the cover of tutors to undermine China? Is that something you've looked at?
Yes. You are in the China Writers Group, and maybe you're also in the chat group. There was a guy, Kyle, which is for sure working for the NED, son of a Canadian astronaut. Kyle, what's his family name? I don't remember. Completely crazy on drugs and yeah, womanizing, all kinds of issues. I think he's now expelled from China last week or so. Haven't you seen that story in the chat group of the CVG?
I missed it, unfortunately. No.
Yeah, you didn't miss something important. That guy is completely crazy.
Okay.
Yes, so to answer your question, yes, there are English teachers working for not CIA, NED, or OSF, all these three-letter organizations.
Mm.
Yes.
Okay. Magdalena, yes.
Yes. So in my school, I work at a private school, and we have teachers from all over the world. I have Chinese friends, and they explained to me that there's a very, very high pressure for high school kids to getting into university. And because of that, there is a huge amount of studying going on at all the times of the day. There's literally, when you're a high school student, there's no free time whatsoever. That's children study and study and study and study. And there's a huge pressure on them. So much so that you actually, apparently there was an increase in suicides of high school students who didn't get into university. And this teacher explained to me that this was the reason why the Chinese government decided not to allow private tutoring anymore, because of this culture of studying too much, taking completely over the life of these kids. So that's what I heard. So take it.
Yes, I can confirm that. Still, the GACO is an issue, is a problem. GACO is everything in China. If you don't succeed there, your life is done. The only solution then remaining is to study abroad. But yes, there is still today, even with a ban on private tutoring, there's a problem that the GACO is causing too much pressure, and there's still too much studying. Yes, I agree with you. That is an issue. Yes.
Did you also have a follow-up question, Magdalena, on the Uyghur and other religious groups that were not simply Chinese, as a Christian?
Yes, I was just asking. I wanted to know, because you mentioned Christianity. but you did not mention other religions. And I'm not referring to the Uyghurs. I'm referring to any other religion, because I would think that there are other religions in China besides Christianity. So I would have liked to also see what I'm interested in is actually to see the participation in religious activity in China as a percentage of the population, and compare that with religious participation, any religious participation in any Western country as a comparison. That's what I was really curious about.
Yes, of course, you're right. Yeah. First of all, there's a difference between philosophies, Confucianism, and so on, and Buddhism, and the religions as we know that. And of course, there are many other religions in China. And of course, you're right. Yes, Christianity is only a small fraction, but I have done my research specifically on Christianity. I have not done any research on how many Buddhists, how many Confucianists, how many Taoists there are in China, or how many of the nature religions are doing in China. My research was focused only on Christianity, but you're absolutely right. Basically, every Chinese is a Confucianist. Everyone. They are thinking in that way, even if they are Buddhists, or even when they are Confucian, when they are Christian, or whatever religion, they are first of all Confucianist. Even the Buddhists that I met in China, they are half Confucianist. And there are so many people mixing all these religions. I have known a family where they have 5 different religions. Father, son, and children, and so on, all different religions. And on top of that, there are people who are half this and half that in religion. Yes, it's a complex situation. And yes, you're right, Christianity is only a tiny part. What is 100 million people compared to 1.4 billion people? There are many, many more Buddhists, Taoists, and Confucianists in China. Yes, you're right.
Stephen Doyle.
I should be off mute. Frans, thank you so much for your wonderful lecture and sharing your knowledge with us. I really appreciate that. I learned a lot. My question has to do with the average Chinese person's understanding of the corrupt nature of Western civilization. Would they have any knowledge, for example, of Carol Quigley's teachings and the London bankers and so on and so forth, and the degree of corruption, political corruption and propaganda? Or do they just see the West as generally something that's bad and anti-Chinese, but they don't know much beyond that?
In my opinion, the ordinary Chinese, or maybe not ordinary, the a little bit educated Chinese people have much stronger political ideas about the West than expressed by the top politicians in Beijing. If the decision was with the social media and the ordinary people in China, then China should bomb the United States right away, or invade Taiwan right away after Pelosi. They should have invaded. That's the social media. To answer your question, yes, the ordinary people in China are very well aware of all the bad things here in the West. Yes. And not just the educated people. Chinese people are politically much more mature than the Western brainwashed ordinary people. Chinese people are politically very mature. They also have much stronger views. The Chinese government in Beijing have to calm down all the time. To say, oh, all the we know, yes, you're right, Biden is not a good guy, but calm down. That's the what they're sending out in Beijing. But the social media, they are putting up the fire all the time. And yeah, with good reason, they are right. There is something wrong here with our politics in the West. And they know all these things. Even ordinary people at the countryside, they are politically much more mature than even here educated people. And they are, of course, a little bit smarter than we do. They think faster. Their computer is a little bit more performant than we. And one can see that. It's quite visible. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
All right, next question goes to Thomas. Thomas, are you still there? Yes, you are.
Yes, I'm here. Actually, I have two questions, but anyways. Yes, thank you for the presentation. You described Chinese politics a bit more diverse than at least what I previously had thought. What is the black hand and the white hand? I heard this version from, and I just found it, a China observer, the daughter of Senator Moynihan, who was on Epoch TV. She described that there were two factions in the Chinese Communist Party, the white hand and the black hand, and you know, it's always a power struggle and all that. That's about my only previous image of Chinese Communist government party politics.
I don't know anything about that. I never heard about that. Okay. And I know a couple of people in the Communist Party, more than a couple, but and I read the Chinese media and so on, but I don't know anything. It must be extremely obscure because, yeah. Or maybe I'm stupid. I don't know. I don't know anything about it. Sorry, I cannot answer your question.
Well, on that point, I would just say that the thing you always have to keep on your radar as far as smelling out the misinfo operations that are all over the place in the West, it's crazy, is that people like Kyle Boss, and I think that might have been the name of the figure you were reaching for, this billionaire hedge fund manager, China expert who's always brought on to Epoch Times, Fox News as the big China expert, or Gordon Chang or Miles Gao. They're always weaving these creative writing webs of intrigue. There's something out of like a bad Hollywood script about what's going on behind the scenes, you know, the China whisperers who know about the battles between anyway, it really caters to a very, very low IQ type of audience that, and I'm not trying to call anybody here low IQ, but I mean, they're really trying to cater to a very, very uninformed audience about this, and try to make it always seem like it's just a matter of minutes before Xi Jinping is toppled by the good guys who are pro-democracy, or same thing for Putin, how there's these superhero networks in Russia who are out to topple Putin and restore democracy in Russia. And they're always giving that to the West. But again, it's creative writing. So you always have to be aware that a lot of that is going on. Though there are deep state operations still that haven't been extracted from Russia and China. That's a fact. There's still a fight. Obviously, you don't want to ignore that either. That is real. But yeah, I would just say that as a word of caution. But what was your other question,
Yes.
Thomas?
Well, a Chinese coworker. I work for a German company, a German engineering company, private German engineering company. It's one of these.
Which one?
It's called the EMZ Hanauer. We make parts for dishwashers and home appliances. But anyways, it's Nanjing. I don't know. Anyways, we have a factory in Nanjing, and again, yeah, one of the young co-workers, right, who speaks good English. She asked me if we have lockdowns here again, because they have lockdowns in China again, and this surprised me because, well, a year ago the Czech courts struck down the government measures as being illegal several times, and last week I just found out November 22nd, a federal German court struck down or declared the Bavarian lockdowns and measures to have been illegal. So it surprised me that in China they are facing these COVID lockdowns again. So the question is, should I look upon this as an internal fight between like the Chinese medical authorities who are under the influence or controlled by the WHO, right? How should I look at this?
The lockdowns. China has no other option than lockdowns. This is World War III. This is a biological weapon from the United States against China. The only effective way to tackle that is with lockdown. That's the only way. Lockdowns, and they have good reasons for that. And I agree with you. When there were lockdowns in Shanghai, or consecutive, one after the other, and then were 3 weeks no lockdown, then 2 weeks lockdown again, and so on. And indeed, there was a problem with food distribution. And indeed, there were issues with people who were getting crazy, especially foreigners living in Shanghai and everywhere, in Nanjing too, who were complaining about these lockdowns and so on. Also Chinese people complaining, and some had good reasons to complain. And there were indeed issues with these lockdowns. And that's why they have now fine-tuned the whole system. Because there were local neighborhood committees who were a little bit too strict in these lockdowns. In certain circumstances, you have to give up the lockdown for other major, much more important issues, and so on and so on. They were doing their best, but a little bit too much. There were issues with the lockdowns, yes, but China has no other option than lockdowns to fight this American bioweapon, my opinion.
Yep.
Yeah,
I share that analysis too. Yeah, sorry, Thomas, what was that last thought?
Well, if you want to take Denis Rancourt, from where is he? Ottawa or Montreal? But anyways, he's a Canadian physicist, and he and some co-workers from France, they've looked at all-cause mortality, and they said that the year 2020 was normal in most countries, except for the States. all-cause mortality went up there, and it stratified the poor and the obese, and by jurisdiction. It didn't spill over into Canada. Which the conclusion from that was all the measures, and especially in the US, where the poor and the obese who are unhealthy and can't afford American private health insurance. So I still don't understand why all these other countries, they're still pushing forward, or especially China, right? With the lockdowns.
I would just say this, Thomas. Frans introduced a new way of thinking on a higher level very briefly. And I mean, he went at it summarily, but that there is a higher set of considerations beyond the story of PCR tests and COVID that were being given by the mainstream that has to deal with the new type of global warfare in the form of bacteriological, ethnic targeted pathogens generated by labs that is part of the current warfare of the 21st century. That's like, I think you have to factor that into your calculus, because there's a lot we don't know. But it's this other higher domain where policy is actually being set from the top, where the leadership of China, the leadership of Russia, the leadership of India, Iran, beyond, are all looking primarily at this reality of the war of pathogens, it's a massive complex, 320 plus US run, Pentagon connected biolabs internationally, all opaque, it's all active.
Yes, I've heard about
So I think you have to look at it from the standpoint of reevaluating what China or India or Iran or any other country does as far as what the public is told regarding a response to a pandemic versus what the actual reality is, which has a lot more to do with this battle that's underway right now. I think that's important, because they can't always just tell the population every single thing. It's just, you can't do that. Yeah. Dasha, I know it's super late for you, so I'm going to let you just jump ahead. And I know you had a follow-up question, so go for it.
Sorry, I just want to butt in terms of how different countries deal with this seemingly totalitarian, globalist issues. Okay, so here in Russia, they're implementing this what's that called, biometrics and AI law, etc. Basically, we're all writing petitions and stuff, but basically, judging from your point of view and your train of thought, you could say the same about, like how Putin is just implementing this in order to protect our citizens from inner CIA agents, so that their faces can be recognized in the database, blah, 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 and so that to prevent terrorist attacks, blah, blah, blah. But I mean, honestly, I'd rather have a couple of terrorist attacks and CIA rather than live in a biometric society, you know what I'm saying? So some things are just, you cannot cross the line. With some things, you cannot cross the line. That's my opinion. And I had a couple of questions in the chat. Can I read them out, or?
Sure, you can read your question.
Sorry. Okay, so because this issue is just really, it bothered me. So anyway, so I had a question. Wasn't China responsible for the spread of woke ideology in USA, or was it a rumor? If it was indeed true, why did they do that? Or was that the bad deep state in China that was responsible for that? Why did they do that? Because it not only damages the Western population, especially young people. I think most of them are pretty much brainwashed, and it's just crazy. Anyways, so yeah. And my second question is about the lockdowns in Guangzhou, because pretty much in my experience, I've been working with Guangzhou for 3 years now, and they haven't had many strict measures since the beginning of the pandemic up until now. So I really wonder why they locked down for the first time at such strict measures that they can't even issue the products or like send or receive stuff in that area. And basically, I wanted to know, why was there a lockdown for the first time in this major area, and why now? Do you have any theories why that area wasn't really locked down for 3 years up until now.
So that's
That's
two
it.
questions. Two questions, right? The first one on cultural woke
Yeah.
warfare. Is it just a rumor that China is the cause of that infiltrating the West? And the second one is on the Guangzhou lockdown. So,
Yeah.
Frans, however you wish to handle that, go
Let
for it.
me try.
Okay.
So the first one, maybe I didn't understand it very well. So there is a rumor that China is responsible for the woke culture in the West. Is that right?
That is
So
what
it
you-
was responsible for the spread of the woke ideology.
Why would China do something like that? What would be the purpose, the motive to do that? The woke idea is coming from the United States and is spreading here in Europe and elsewhere. It's not coming from Iran or Russia, certainly not. I don't know who is fabricating such a rumor. It's, yeah, why would China do that? No, that's beyond my imagination. And your second question was about lockdowns in Guangzhou. Why there were so few lockdowns in Guangzhou? Because in China, the rule is if you find one single case, we start a lockdown, a local lockdown. If we have 3 cases, we close the entire district. Cases means a positive tested person. So that is triggered quite fast. I don't know why in Guangzhou that didn't have before this kind of lockdowns, because they had very few positive cases. I don't know. Then you were asking why there are now lockdowns, because they have tested some people positive, and why they cannot supply your products. You have to keep in mind, it is the people first. Economy is only number 4. The people, the culture, and so on is first the people. The welfare and the health of the people is number 1. Economy is something unimportant. It doesn't matter whether your products will be made and delivered or not. Who cares about that? It's entirely unimportant. And I agree with that. I agree that the people should be number 1. Don't you think so?
Yeah, I certainly think so, but I was just approaching it from the perspective that this virus is not real. So, and now that we have figured it out that it could be real for the Chinese population. So now I kind of can see that maybe they kind of had the US kind of drop the bioweapon in that region, and now they have to like lock down and everything.
Yes, of course. Yes, that's right. Yes.
Yeah, I think that's just, it's an extremely important thing that a lot of people were looking more seriously at, I think, a little bit before the COVID thing was sprung onto the world. But the question, and I'm increasingly thinking maybe I can't put this on YouTube. I'll have to find another way of getting this video up. The whatever it was that has been sprung on China from the very beginning did not express the same characteristics, or even Iran. But whatever it was did not express the same characteristics in its effects on the biological, on human beings who would receive this activated pathogen as we had in the USA or Canada or much of the Western world. There's something different, and we know that there is a lot of research that has been done publicly by a variety. Dr. Chetty of South Africa, there's a variety of doctors who demonstrated the ethnic targeting of elements of the pathogen, whatever this is. I'm not an expert. I'm just triangulating from a lot of analysis that has been done by experts, that there is something, and I think the Chinese are on guard currently, that whatever this is, whatever might be sprung, could be the big one. They don't know, but there is a need right now to try to have as much control moving through the storm as possible. And I think that's part of the calculus on every level of the surveillance issues, the every question of the centralization of decision making that's happening on a variety of levels, and especially the medical response. I think you have to always have that in the mind, because we're up now against something very, very nefarious. That, well, we all know that. I mean, if anyone is on this show right now, they've already discovered that this is a very bad intention right now. So yeah, just keep that in mind. So we have, oh yeah, sorry, Dasha, what?
I said thanks.
No problem. All right, so we have one follow-up from, Douglas. Doug has been waiting for a while, and then we'll have Douglas, then Yuri, then Rohit, and then we'll call it quits for today. So Doug.
It's a break. These are two very simple questions. One, would you feel comfortable in giving us the general opinion, the general opinion in China of the current president function in the US as opposed to Mr. Trump, who was there earlier, please?
I didn't get your question. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, maybe I'm not loud enough. Would you feel comfortable giving us the current impression in China of the current person in the position of president in the US as opposed to Mr. Trump when he was there 6 years ago?
Yeah, Trump is much more popular than Biden, much more popular. In spite of all what he did in the trade war, still Trump is more popular. I mean, on the general population in China, I mean, the government, of course, they watch out what they are saying about that. But still, I have heard from the top of the Communist Party that they are pushing to talk to the real leaders of the United States instead of Mr. Biden. And even Xi Jinping has indicated something like that during the last 2 times ago, telephone conversation or video conversation with Biden. He didn't say it so clearly, but what he wanted to say was, yes, Mr. Biden, we are talking to you now, but we prefer to speak to the real leaders of the United States. And with Trump, it was different because there the Chinese got the feeling that he was the one who was real taking the lead, who was trying to manage the country. And with Biden, it's very clear that he's a theater player who put on the scene, but that the real managers or producers of the show are somewhere else. And that is annoying Xi Jinping and the whole China government, that they have to talk with somebody who he say yes and no and whatever, but they are doing something very different. So that's the general impression. The general public in China are in favor of Trump. They strongly dislike Biden.
Fine, thank you. One more question. I've lived in half a dozen countries, and my impression is that in most of them, the rural people in one country, let's say it's the UK, are much more like the rural people, the farm people that live in France, than they are like the people that live in either London or Paris. is that similar in China? Do the rural people in Belgium, for example, are they much more like the Chinese rural than the people in, let's say, Brussels or Beijing?
Are you talking about the royal or the
Rural.
real?
Farmers, rural.
Ah, rural.
Excuse me,
Okay.
I didn't express that well. Pardon me, please.
In China, the rural people, the farmers, are getting rich more faster than the average Chinese people. Their income is improving faster than people working in a factory. And they are not so much separated as in other countries, as in France, for example. Belgium, you cannot compare because there is no countryside anymore in Belgium. Everything is
Sorry.
But if I compare France or Germany with
Yes.
China, there's a clear distinction between countryside and city. And the way of thinking of the people in the cities and the countryside is a little bit different. I mean, here in Western Europe. In China, every small village in the countryside has many people, young people who went to the cities to work in the factory. And they have daily contact through social media with their parents and everybody and friends in the countryside. So there is quite close contact. The difference between countryside and city is not as big as here in Europe, I feel. Does that answer your question?
That does answer my question. Thank you.
Great. All right, Yuri.
Okay, I have a question more from a man in the street level. What did I write? It's kind of a follow-up on Doyle's question. What do man in the street Chinese admire about the USA? And, you know, following that, yeah, I know it's difficult now to the general dumbing down in the United States, but to what extent do the Chinese recognize the difference between the US people and the US government? Are they aware of, at least from my angle and in my bubble, that there is a massive resistance to what's going on in the United States? It's, from what I can see, really big. And so I'm wondering, if I was a man in the street and met a man in China and met a Chinese, say at a cafe or something, would I be able to talk to him about, say, the American system, or what Doyle mentioned, Carol Quigley? Are these things known among the men in the street? Or I sure would like to see Matt's work translated into Chinese and Russian, see what kind of reaction that gets over there. That's what I would really think would be a good thing, as well as Fauci's, as well as RFK Jr.'s book on Fauci. That's my questions.
Okay. Years ago, I had a feeling that the ordinary Chinese people were making a better distinction between the American government and so on, and the ordinary people in America. So they still could show some compassion with the American people. But that is I feel, my feeling is slightly disappearing. Yeah. They are blaming, of course, the American government for all kinds of things, and more also the ordinary people. And because I heard somebody saying that they keep voting for the Republicans and the Democrats, which is actually the same and so on, doesn't matter. So nothing will change there in that country. So they're blaming also now the ordinary people for everything what's going wrong in the United States. Such things I hear in China. They have less patience with it. You can see the Cambridge report, which was published some days ago, where you can see that the Chinese dislike more and more the United States, not just the government, but also the people. That is going on today in China.
A lot of people in my bubble also feel the same way about the American people, about their own citizens. I mean, it's really getting to a kind of severe point, and of course, this is kind of dangerous.
Yes, years ago, I could read on the social media, it's a pity for the ordinary people in America that they have such a bad government, such things. But years ago, today, they are blaming the Americans. Oh, they are all bad people now. Also, the people from America, they should do something about it. Why there's nothing happening? Why it's not improving there? The ordinary people are also guilty now, today. That's my feeling.
Well, you see the same thing with in the Ukraine war, that people are starting to blame the people. That's a sad situation, and it usually has a very bad outcome. But I don't blame them. Like I said, many people in my bubble blame our people, our own citizens. Well, okay. Are they aware of the resistance in America to our own government? Do they have an inkling? No. That's too bad.
Yeah.
That's too bad.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Yuri. All right, last question for today. Rohit, you got a follow-up question. Go for it. Can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Rohit? Whatever you did last time to make your microphone work, do that again.
Oh, sorry about that. Hello?
There you go.
Yeah, so I just wanted to get your perspective on this. So like in the Western media, there's a lot of reporting typically about Chinese human rights abuses, like genocide against Uyghurs and other minorities and things like that. What's the actual reality there on the ground? What's actually happening in China? Are there actually human rights abuses or genocide happening? Like what's actually going on in China?
What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's all propaganda.
Of course. Yes, and we are now even over the tipping point. That is, I mean, China is now complaining more and more, and there are more and more reports about human rights abuses in the United States. And they are right, of course. And you cannot blame the Chinese if they feel some sympathy for the native Indian people in the United States. I read almost every 2 weeks, I read something about that in the Chinese media, about how badly the Americans treated the Indian people. Of course, the Indian people in North America, they are descendants and they have the same DNA as the Chinese or similar. And China is feeling some sympathy for them. And yes, so it's going the other way now. China is blaming the US for human rights abuse. Such things I read in China. Even from government sources. China Daily also is publishing about that. And about human, what's happening in China. Yes, it's all propaganda.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do find it ironic, again, that for somebody like Donald Trump, who many people had perceived as being extremely anti-Chinese, the Chinese people didn't see it the same way at all. And I was struck whenever I would tune in to reporting on China's views of the United States during the Trump administration, it was always enormously positive. And if you actually look at the growth of the BRI, the growth of the robustness of Chinese investments internationally and also within its own country, it maximized, it peaked throughout the Trump administration. And I think that has a lot to do with what was going on in terms of the nation actually acting in some confused way, but still legitimately so in its own self-interest. And China can only work with countries that actually that care about their genuine, authentic self-interests. In that sense, you can have an honest dialogue with anybody. Whereas when you have a regime that is operated by a death cult or interests that really don't even want the people that they're supposed to represent to even live, as we have in so much of North America or Europe right now, China doesn't have much to work with or negotiate with. So we could see how quickly things can change once again. I mean, the opinion is something, mass opinion changes like the breeze. It's not something which is permanent in any way. And you could see if there was some change in paradigm or change in way of thinking about our genuine self-interest, that could easily flip and become very positive once again as far as U.S. East-West perceptions. But right now, it's not looking good, that's for sure. But
we can even see from like the foundations of our societies, China, it's very much a pro-human civilization and culture, but here in the West, we're very anti-human these days, anti-freedom, anti-human in the West these days.
Ideologically, yeah. I mean, there's been mistakes on all sides over the years, but I mean, right now, yeah, we're ideologically run by something which doesn't see humans as being very good. We're rather seen increasingly like pollution machines that should be done away with to protect Gaia or something. It's weird. So one thing that I do think that is the most important to cut through this is, again, wisdom, knowledge. True knowledge is the best way to inoculate ourselves spiritually, psychologically from lies. That's the best form of inoculation is knowledge. And from there, we can actually get to a place of having common understanding, real dialogue. And we're in a place, I think, where the hunger, the thirst for real knowledge is peaking in many ways. People really want to know, now that they're only now acknowledging that this fire is ablaze in their house. Perhaps you could say, well, they should have known earlier. This is not a new fire. It's been it's been hot for a long time. But whatever the case may be, now it's beginning to become something that cannot be ignored. People want to figure out not only what caused the fire, so that I'm seeing a massive hunger and a thirst for that, and also what can put it out. Where is the water? How is water used? I think China right now, a lot of the Eurasian countries have a much better sense of how water works to put out fire. Unfortunately, still too many people in the West think that Russia and China are the enemy, and so they can't see that that their enemy is not water. And that's a lesson that has to be learned quickly. So, Frans, thank you so much for helping this process along, and hopefully we can continue to spread it. And like I said, your book, Frans Vandenbosch's book, is available in the chat box as well as in the video description box. I highly encourage people to pick it up. And next week, we're going to have Joaquin Flores, who's going to deliver something on Russia. There's the book right there. That's what it looks like. When you see that book online, you buy that book. Statecraft and Society in China. So from there, next week, I hope to see everyone there for 2 p.m., I believe, again, was when Joaquin's going to go through the Russian analysis. But obviously, like Joaquin always does, it's going to be metaphysical, and it's going to take on a variety of dimensions. So I'm looking forward to that. So again, Frans, thank you so much, and thank you everyone for showing up today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, monsieur.
Thank you very much. Great
Thanks a
show.
lot.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Again, don't say bonsoir.
Bye.
Goedenavond.
Thanks again.
再见.